The Committee for Campus Inclusion was created in 1990 at Arizona State University. The mission of CCI is to create and maintain a civil and just campus environment that values diversity, promotes respect for all individuals regardless of their status, protects free speech and academic freedom, and promotes the pursuit of individual goals without interference from discriminatory harassment. CCI continues to advance this mission through educational experiences, essential to an institution of higher education. Furthermore, we recognize and celebrate those who are working to further the vision of diversity and inclusion, while also providing recommendations to the Vice Provost for Inclusion and Community Engagement on issues related to diversity and inclusion. While diversity addresses the number of individuals that represent a range of human differences, inclusion encompasses creating a welcoming environment where all persons within our university community can thrive and succeed as articulated through our university charter.
Welcome to today's episode, Why Many Faculty Struggle to Understand Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, from the Make Me Your Voice podcast, sponsored by ASU's Committee for Campus Inclusion at the Tempe campus. As such, today's program explores how ideas about merit, hard work, and hierarchy make it difficult for some faculty members to understand the important role they can play in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging on campus. Monica Gaughan is a professor in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. She studies scientists with a particular focus on how the professional life course is affected by policy and social dynamics. She is currently a co-principal investigator on ASU's Advance Award to Forward Equity Among Faculty and principal investigator of an NSF RAPID grant to study how COVID-19 is affecting faculty work patterns and productivity.
Hi, I'm Monica Gaughan, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. One of the things I find most exciting about my unit at Arizona State University is that we study the human history and the human experience from very deep time, from early hominins to the current time, very complex human beings. I find fascinating the idea that at the same time that there are hunter-gatherers right now trying to deal with the coronavirus without electricity, for example, there are also Homo sapiens with earned PhDs working in incredibly complex organizations like higher education institutions such as our own. And it's the same species. And so that's my answer to the question of why would you be in a School of Human Evolution and Social Change? And one of them is that human beings with earned PhDs work in extraordinarily complex settings, and yet we are still members of the same species that we can observe and study throughout the world, a species of incredible creativity, intelligence, altruism, compassion. We're migratory, we are very social. There's all kinds of wonderful things about being a human being. However, we also know that we're capable of terrible biases, of hatred, of war making. In other words, of all of the negatives of being a member of this species as well. And so the first thing I would like to address in answering the question, why is it so difficult for many faculty members to understand some of the challenges and opportunities that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging involves? And that is, faculty members tend to forget that we are members of a species that has both positive and negative traits. Because of this oversight, it is sometimes difficult for us to see our own behaviors that may be on the dark side of the species characteristic, things that we've been told are not operating for us. So what I want to do is just help you understand a little bit about the world of a professor, or at least the world of a professor who is in a Research One university like ASU, to see if it might help to develop some insight about this phenomenon that I've mentioned. So the first characteristic of Research 1 faculty members is that we have been inculcated with an ideology of meritocracy. We have come through school as excellent students for the most part, or at least we got around to being excellent students in time to become professors, okay? And we've been told that we're the best of the best. And certainly in this incredibly competitive system that is research science in the academic setting, we've all competed successfully. We've competed in a system that is itself highly selective and is continually reinforcing the idea that we only hire the best of the best. There's processes that convince us that we are the bee's knees. So we go through blind peer review, and in blind peer review, other scholars are telling us what we did well and what we did poorly, and hopefully through sometimes long, sometimes short processes, we arrive at a contribution to the scientific knowledge base, which is a massive achievement for any human being. We're highly competitive. We compete for places in schools. We compete for places in as faculty lines. We compete for placement in journals. We compete in order to be promoted. And so the entire system is built around a hyper-competitive model, a model that sometimes presents itself as zero-sum games. In other words, if I win, you lose, and that only the very best people are there. Now, what do we know about human beings when we tell them these sorts of things about themselves, when they're successful competitors and that they are all that? There's a tendency to believe, yes, I am all that, okay? So the second component of kind of a worldview of many professors is that we all work very hard. So for example, when someone points out that competitive system that has been set up, that we have thrived in, is one that also has systematically disadvantaged women, people of color, indigenous people, foreign-born people, queer people, people who are living with disabilities. When we point out that it's harder for some people to make it in that competitive environment, that really can upset the typical faculty member, because what he or she or they is thinking is, did I not sacrifice many, many years of my life at school? Have I not competed and been told that my ideas are poor or asked to defend myself? And the answer to that, of course, is yes, it's true. There may be some mythology out there about slacker faculty members, but I haven't met them, okay? Every faculty member that I know who has been successful has worked very, very hard to get to where they are now in the academy, wherever that is. So when one has been working so hard in a competitive and sometimes brutal environment, and then told that because of one's own positionality, it might have been easier than it is for other people, that's a very difficult thing to understand. That's a very difficult thing to understand because of my third point, which is that the system does a lot of the bias work for us. It doesn't rely on me as a faculty member necessarily being actively engaged in racist, sexist, homophobic speech, because those selection dynamics, the competitive dynamics, the resource dynamics that advantage some people over other people and disadvantage some people behind other people are ones that do not require that I participate in them myself. I can just enjoy them. I'm a cisgendered, white, Christian, married, female person of high income and high education. So with respect to my own positionality, I could tell you some stories about being a woman in science for sure, but there's a lot of other bases on which I have not had the kinds of challenges that other people have had. And similarly, there are people who haven't even had the pat on the ass experience that I have had throughout my career. Fortunately, I'm actually now an older woman, and so now I'm in the invisible female crone phase, and it's quite lovely. It's actually been several years since anybody has, touched me inappropriately in a professional setting. But again, we shouldn't have to age into these statuses or earn our way into being taken seriously, given the resources that we need, the mentoring that we need, the recognition that we need, the acknowledgement of the problems that each person faces in successfully negotiating a scientific career. I mean, that's the responsibility of institutions. It's the responsibility of our shared culture together to root out these ideas that are inherently stratifying and that do privilege some members of the community more than other members of the community, and in ways that really don't have anything at all to do with doing excellent science or excellent English or excellent art or any other of the creative, intellectual, and artistic endeavors that we do in universities throughout the world. So I think that as we think about how can faculty become more open to their own roles in forwarding diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging in universities. And I would say that it requires a fundamental shift in how we view our own accomplishments. And I think that shouldn't be too hard, because we all stand on the shoulders of giants, to paraphrase a science studies person of the 1960s. We rely on what's happened before us to do our science and other creative endeavors, and we rely on others to do those creative endeavors. And we rely on government support to do it. One of my jokes is we're all government supported artists, but it's true. We're in a public university. So the reality is, without the public, without our collaborators, without our colleagues, without our students, without all of the people who've gone before us, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we're doing. It doesn't mean that as individuals, we're not making amazing contributions. It just means that we're not all that. Our accomplishments are shared accomplishments, even when they're showing up on our CVs as our individual achievements. Second, we need to think about the scope of institutional service that's required truly to engage in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work in universities. It is not enough to let that be somebody else's job. But it's also necessary that the institution as a whole put resources into meaningful diversity work at every level. It's not enough just to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work for students. We need to be thinking about staff. We need to be thinking about faculty. We need to be thinking about community members. And it's not enough just to have designated people who are the diversity, equity, and inclusion people. Certainly, faculty members are responsible for all their students, no matter what. And so we need to be more sensitive to the fact that not all students are coming from the same places that we are. Just as I hope, with an increasingly diversifying professoriate, we'll understand that most of our colleagues, or many of our colleagues, don't come from the same place that we do in the world. And so that leads to the last part. We have to learn some new skills and new ways of being in the world. I already made a joke about being old, but let's face it, faculty members on average are old. Many of us grew up in legal segregation. Some of us grew up under apartheid. We come from places where Muslim people are not allowed to wear certain religious garb in public. We come from places where we did not have the civil liberties that we have now. And so, just as when I was younger, I was pretty grumpy about some of the older people in my life not getting it, I realize now that some young folks are pretty grumpy with us, just thinking that it's enough to be woke in the way that it was good to be woke in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or whenever it was that many of us spent the last time thinking about ourselves and the world and the way that we interact with people in it. And so I think there needs to be a little bit more reflection on what does it mean to have become a professor and had this kind of career in a time in which we now have civil rights for gay, lesbian, transgendered people, where there truly are people from all walks of life in our universities. We share our laboratories with women. These are the challenges. The challenges of an inclusive society translate as well into the challenges of being in an inclusive university. And we cannot continue to think that we live in a bubble that is somehow special and different from other human institutions that we know can have very negative consequences. And so I'm really hopeful, actually. I think that there's a lot of exciting things that are happening with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I think there's much more of an understanding that everybody means everybody, from the very top of our academic institutions to the lowliest jobs that keep us all safe and healthy at the universities. That's what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, that we're all in this together, that we come from different points of view, that we all deserve to do well. We all can work hard, right? We can work hard and have our accomplishments recognized for what they are in a system that is designed to value multiple ways of doing great work.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. In addition to being present here, CCI invites you to join our mailing list by emailing us at ccicontact@asu.edu and visit our website at inclusion.asu.edu/cci.